I never expected to be the one standing silently in the corner, invisible yet indispensable, until the day I realized how much I was really carrying. It's strange. The weight you don't see until it starts to crush you. I'm Destiny Martin, 34, a school counselor in a small Ohio town. Every day, I guide teenagers through their darkest moments, bullying, broken homes, lost dreams. But at home, where I should feel safety, I'm the calm before the storm, the steady hand everyone leans on but rarely thanks. I'm the one who keeps the family afloat, paying bills, fixing cars, cushioning unexpected costs. Just last month, I quietly covered my sister Lisa's rent for 3 months when her job stalled. No questions asked, no acknowledgement given. Daniel, my husband, and I bought the family house years ago, and though it's all legally in my name, nobody seems to notice. My mother-in-law, Wendy Stafford, is a constant thorn. Her charm veils sharp criticism, always reminding me my efforts aren't good enough. She's never subtle about her disdain, but she masks it as concern, often undercutting me while taking advantage of my generosity. Lately, something's felt off, like the cracks I've ignored for years are starting to widen. I tell myself it's just stress, that I'm imagining things. I haven't used the secret power I hold, the legal ownership of our home and assets, because I want peace, not conflict. But sometimes I wonder if peace comes at too high a price. Am I really invisible? Or am I just invisible to those who matter most? I remember the first time I truly felt invisible, though I didn't quite understand it then. I was 12, sitting in our backyard one summer afternoon, watching my parents gush over Lisa's scholarship win. They laughed and hugged her, proud and glowing, while I sat quietly on the wooden bench feeling like a ghost. Not one word was said to me. It was the moment the favoritism became painfully clear. Lisa was the golden child, charismatic, outgoing, always praised. I was the quiet one, expected to pick up the slack, to be the backbone without recognition. My parents never said it outright, but their silence screamed, I was less important. I tried to make sense of it, telling myself maybe they just loved differently, or that tough love was their way of pushing me to be better. But the sting of being overlooked left a scar. I remember once, when I was bullied at school, I tried telling my mom. She shrugged it off, saying, "You need to toughen up. Lisa handled things fine." That moment hurt worse than any insult. I buried those feelings deep, hoping one day my family would see me for who I really was, not just the quiet shadow in the background. But as years passed, that silence built a wall I wasn't sure I could ever climb. Despite it all, I stepped up. Quietly, without fanfare, I became the family's safety net. I've poured over $50,000 into debts nobody else touched. Medical bills for my parents, patching up the old family house, loaning Lisa $5,000 to start her little business. I gave up a dream vacation last year to fund Daniel's father, Harold's emergency surgery, swallowing my disappointment without a word. These sacrifices, which should have been acts of love, are treated like obligations. Wendy, with her sharp tongue and veiled insults, often sneers at my lack of success, while happily accepting my help. Daniel tells me I deserve better, that I shouldn't be the expendable one. But I still cling to hope that one day the family will recognize me. I keep a secret close. Legally, the family home and rental properties are in my name. It's my secret power, but I never use it. I tell myself it's for the sake of peace, to keep the fragile family ties from snapping. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I wonder if I'm just handing over the keys to my own undoing. The roles in this family are painfully clear. Daniel, Lisa, Harold, they each play their parts. And me? I'm the backbone. But even bones break under pressure. Last summer, at our niece's birthday party, Wendy's words cut deeper than she probably intended. In front of a dozen relatives, she said with a cruel smile, maybe if Destiny managed money better, she wouldn't be so stretched thin. The room went silent. Some chuckled awkwardly, others looked away. I felt my chest tighten, the insult landing like a punch I wasn't ready for. I forced a smile, muttered something about us all having struggles, and excused myself quietly. Inside, I was shaken, heart pounding, but I told myself, she's under stress. She didn't mean it. Still, something shifted. For the first time, I refused to join the post-party cleanup, a small act of rebellion, but mine. Usually, I stayed behind, tidying up without complaint. That night, I left, my footsteps light, but my mind heavy. That tiny moment of silent pushback felt like a crack in the armor I'd built around myself. I wasn't sure where it would lead, but for the first time, I felt the stirrings of doubt, not just about Wendy, but about the family I'd sacrificed so much for. The calm before the storm was no longer a refuge. It was the eye of something bigger, something I couldn't yet see. I knew the moment Wendy noticed my small act of defiance that it had set something in motion. The following week felt like a slow unraveling. Messages started popping up on Daniel's phone, cryptic texts from cousins I barely spoke to, questioning my commitment to the family's finances, my emotional overreactions. One cousin's message made my blood run cold. Maybe Destiny's head is in the clouds. She doesn't see the bigger picture. It wasn't just idle gossip anymore. Wendy's loyalists, her so-called flying monkeys, were circling, whispering poison in Daniel's ear under the guise of concern. I saw the shift in him, subtle but unmistakable, as he began urging me to just let things go, to stop making waves. When I confronted Wendy in the kitchen one afternoon, I expected denial, but the coldness was worse than I imagined. Her smile was tight, eyes sharp. "You're imagining things, Destiny. We're family. You're just too emotional. Maybe if you stopped taking everything so personally, things would be easier." The words stung, this twisted version of care, a weapon disguised as wisdom. I felt the walls closing in as I realized how isolated I was becoming, even within my own bloodline. I replayed her words in my mind, trying to find the fault in myself. Was I really the problem? The doubt gnawed at my resolve, but Daniel's quiet support kept me from falling apart completely. "You're not alone," he whispered one night, squeezing my hand. That small comfort was a lifeline amid the encroaching storm. Determined to stop the silent war from tearing us apart, I requested a family meeting, a chance to clear the air with Wendy and Harold. Sitting across from them, I spoke as calmly as I could, laying out my feelings without blame, hoping for understanding. "I want fairness," I said. "Respect. I want us to be honest with one another." But Wendy's reaction was a calculated performance. Tears welled in her eyes as she clutched her chest, voice trembling with feigned pain. "I've sacrificed so much for this family," she said, "and you're turning against me." Harold avoided my gaze, silent, as if dissociating from the moment. The mediator, my Uncle James, sided with Wendy, brushing my concerns aside with a tired sigh. "Family fights happen. Sometimes you have to forgive and forget," he advised, as if my pain was a trivial inconvenience. I left that meeting feeling hollow, crushed by the weight of manipulation heavier than ever before. My attempt at peace had only made the divide wider. I wasn't seeking vengeance. I just wanted to be seen, to matter in the family I'd supported endlessly. Yet their refusal to acknowledge my truth felt like an invisible wall, closing between me and the people I loved. The silence that followed was deafening. I spent long nights staring at the ceiling, wondering where I had gone wrong, and if the family I'd sacrificed so much for was slipping away forever. But despite the sting of defeat, a flicker of resolve remained. If peace was elusive, I had to find another way to survive. The next humiliation came when I least expected it, at Daniel's promotion party. The room buzzed with congratulations and laughter until Wendy chose that moment to strike. With a smile that didn't reach her eyes, she leaned into a cluster of Daniel's colleagues and casually dropped a bombshell. "Did you know Destiny took out a personal loan to cover family expenses?" she said, her voice dripping with implication. "It was reckless, frankly. Not the kind of financial judgment you'd expect from someone handling such responsibilities." The laughter faltered, eyes darted to me, whispers floated around the room. I felt the sting of humiliation burn through my cheeks, my professional reputation unraveling in front of friends and strangers alike. Daniel's jaw clenched, but the damage was done. The impact went beyond embarrassment. My career, something I'd poured my heart into, felt suddenly fragile. I could see the doubts in colleagues' eyes, the questions about my reliability. Wendy's words weren't just careless. They were a calculated attack designed to isolate and weaken me. My hands clenched into fists, but I forced myself to breathe, to stay composed. Daniel caught my eye across the room, and in that glance, I saw his silent promise. We weren't defeated yet, but the stakes had risen. This was no longer just about family tensions. This was a battle for my dignity, my future. Despite everything, I extended an olive branch. I invited Wendy to lunch, hoping for a chance to rebuild even a fraction of what had been broken. As we sat across from each other, I spoke honestly, voice steady but soft. "I want us to move forward," I said, "but I need respect, honesty. I can't keep carrying this weight alone." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something, maybe regret or understanding, but then her expression hardened. She accused me of holding grudges, of being unforgiving, and coldly threatened to cut me out of future family decisions. My heart cracked open as I laid bare my vulnerabilities for the first time, explaining how deeply her actions had hurt me, but her eyes were hard, dismissive. When I stood to leave, the finality in her rejection was like a slap across my face. I whispered to Daniel later that day, "I did everything I could." The sting of rejection was suffocating, yet beneath it grew a cold clarity. If peace wasn't possible, if respect was denied, then I had to find justice on my own terms. The family I'd sacrificed for was no longer a sanctuary. It was a battlefield, and I was ready to fight. The quiet after the storm was deafening. Calls stopped coming, texts went unanswered, and the once familiar voices of relatives faded into silence. It was as if I'd become a ghost, someone too difficult to deal with, too demanding, and worse, the villain in a story I hadn't written. Lisa, caught between loyalty and the pressure of family whispers, urged me to just let it go one evening. Her voice low, tinged with exhaustion and guilt. The sharp edges of her words cut deeper than I expected. How could I let go when the ground beneath me was crumbling? The house where I'd poured my heart was now a battlefield, and I was losing every foothold. Daniel was my only refuge, his presence a fragile thread holding me together. One sleepless night, I sat in the dim light of our living room, the hum of the city outside a distant reminder of a world that seemed to move on without me. "Maybe I am the problem," I whispered into the darkness, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Self-doubt gnawed at me relentlessly, an invisible weight pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. Every sacrifice, every quiet act of generosity felt suddenly meaningless, swallowed by the tide of suspicion and betrayal. The exhaustion seeped into my bones, a heavy fog that threatened to consume me whole. And yet, beneath that fog, something cold and sharp began to stir, a simmering clarity, a flicker of resolve that refused to be snuffed out. I replayed conversations in my mind, scrutinizing every word, every glance, like a detective desperate to find a flaw in my own story. Had I been too demanding? Too emotional? The questions circled, relentless and unforgiving. But no matter how deeply I searched, the truth remained stubbornly clear. I had been pushed aside, my generosity weaponized against me, painted as selfishness and instability. Wendy's web of manipulation had woven itself tightly around the family, and I was caught in its center, isolated and vulnerable. The family I'd loved, the people I'd sacrificed for, now seemed like strangers whispering behind my back. The weight of that isolation was suffocating, but beneath it, the cold clarity burned brighter. I was not broken yet, not entirely. That night, as I finally sank onto the couch, body trembling with exhaustion and heart aching with loneliness, I understood something vital. This darkness was a crucible. I had to embrace the pain, the isolation, the doubt, because only by facing them could I find the strength to fight back. The battlefield was set, and though I was losing ground now, this was only the shadow before the dawn. My family had turned against me, but inside me, a quiet fire was beginning to blaze. I didn't know yet how I would reclaim what was mine, but I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was the breaking point, the moment before everything changed. The discovery caught me off guard like a punch to the gut. Sorting through the mail one afternoon, A plain envelope slipped out of the stack. Cold, official, heavy with consequence. It was a pile of loan documents totaling $89,000. My name was printed in bold at the top, the signatory on loans I never authorized, never even knew existed. The banks had sent notices I never saw, demands for repayments tied to Stafford family expenses masquerading as emergencies or investments. My heart slammed against my ribs as the reality crashed down. Wendy and Harold had taken out these loans behind my back, using my good name as their shield. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating. It felt like the floor dropped beneath me. That night at dinner, the papers sat between us like a landmine. I watched Wendy's face, searching for a flicker of remorse, but found only cold calculation. "Family doesn't sue family, Destiny," she said with a calmness that made my blood boil. Her voice was soft, but every word was a dagger cloaked in silk. I swallowed my rage, smiled, a smile icy and steady, and slid the court summons across the table. The room froze. Gasps echoed around us like thunder. Daniel's eyes met mine, a complex swirl of pride and heartache reflecting back at me. In that stilled moment, something inside me shattered and rebuilt itself anew. The veil had lifted. Hope died. But justice was born. The air was thick with tension, every breath a measured act of defiance. Wendy's smirk faltered for the first time, her mask slipping just enough to expose the calculating woman beneath. The witnesses at the table, relatives caught in the crossfire of our clash, absorbed the shock with wide eyes and whispered disbelief. Daniel squeezed my hand quietly, his silent support a balm to my fractured spirit. The betrayal was no longer hidden beneath layers of half-truths and deceit. It was raw, undeniable, and my response was clear. I would not be the victim anymore. The quiet, accommodating woman who took everything on her shoulders was gone. In her place stood someone forged in betrayal's fire, cold, resolute, and unyielding. That night, lying awake in the dark, I replayed the years of sacrifices and the slow unraveling of trust. The pain was a heavy shroud, but beneath it, a fierce flame ignited. Anger, not the wild, uncontrolled fury I feared, but a focused, deliberate fire that sharpened my resolve. I saw the pattern, finally clear as daylight. Wendy's exploitation wasn't a series of accidents or misunderstandings. It was a calculated, long game, and I had been the mark, the silent source of endless support she drained without guilt. "Never again," I whispered into the silence, the words a solemn vow to myself. That secret I'd kept, the legal ownership of the family home and rental properties, once a comforting safety net, now felt like a weapon in my hands. With Daniel's unwavering support, I understood that power wasn't about money alone. It was about rights, contracts, control. The grief that had weighed me down began to lift, replaced by a cold clarity that cut through the fog of hurt. I was no longer the passive caretaker, the invisible scapegoat. I was a strategist, a woman ready to reclaim what was hers and fight for justice on her terms. The path ahead was uncertain, but I faced it with eyes wide open and heart steel strong. Sitting with Daniel in the quiet of our kitchen, the weight of everything pressing down on us, I laid bare the plan that had taken root in my mind. No more silent sacrifices. No more enabling the endless cycle of exploitation. We would use every legal document, every property title, every scrap of evidence to protect ourselves and hold Wendy accountable. Daniel listened, his brow furrowed but his eyes steady. Though the idea of family drama made him uneasy, his loyalty never wavered. He stood firmly by my side, ready to face the storm with me. We agreed the main target was clear: Wendy, whose parasitic control had to end. Our first step was practical and precise. Gather every contract, bank statement, and piece of proof we could find. This wasn't about revenge or personal vendettas anymore. It was strategy. We would play by the rules, but on our terms. The fragile peace had fractured beyond repair, and now we moved forward with calculated purpose. The house I'd kept alive with love and labor was no longer just home. It was the heart of our defense, and as Daniel reached across the table to squeeze my hand, I felt a surge of determination unlike anything I'd known before. The battle had just begun, and this time, I was ready to fight. I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by a growing pile of statements, deeds, and loan documents, my mind racing to map out every thread tying the Stafford family to my name and credit. The rental properties that had once symbolized security now stood as a tangled web of control. The monthly mortgage payments, utility bills, property taxes, all under my legal ownership. Wendy and Harold were living off the foundation I'd built, relying on my creditworthiness like a lifeline, yet without any official claim or responsibility. It was a bitter irony that the very assets they sought to dominate were mine alone on paper. Driven by a mix of frustration and clarity, I reached out to a trusted lawyer, hoping for guidance, and most importantly, legal leverage. During our meetings, I learned about informal arrangements Wendy had invoked over the years, whispered promises, vague gestures, and half-remembered conversations she'd twisted into claims. She had convinced others that her control over family finances was rightful, that my generosity was a given to exploit. Every suspicious bank transfer, every unpaid bill, even those I had mistakenly covered, were now carefully cataloged in my notes. I printed copies, marked dates, highlighted inconsistencies. These weren't just errors or oversights, they were a pattern of exploitation. The weight of realization settled on my shoulders. The family didn't just depend on me, they needed me, and this dependency was a weapon in my hands. For the first time in months, a cold, steady hope flickered. I wasn't powerless. I was the gatekeeper of the assets keeping them afloat. This knowledge was my shield, my sword. I whispered to myself as I worked late into the night. They need me more than I need them. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. I had been invisible, undervalued, but now I was a force they couldn't ignore. I paced the room, phone pressed to my ear, detailing each finding to Daniel. His voice over the line was steady, grounding. "This is the leverage we needed," he said. I clung to that, the flicker of partnership against a tidal wave of betrayal. Around me, the quiet hum of the house felt different, less like home, more like a battleground. But I was ready to fight, not with anger, but with cold precision. The game had changed, and I was finally holding the rules. Despite the turmoil inside, I kept my face calm. No one outside this room needed to see the storm gathering in my chest. I allowed myself a moment to breathe, the scent of the evening rain wafting through the cracked window, grounding me. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Behind the steady facade I wore every day, smiling at family dinners, laughing at the right moments, I was quietly unraveling their access, thread by thread. Passwords on joint financial accounts were changed under the careful guidance of my attorney. I transferred property deeds, ensuring that every title was locked tight under my and Daniel's names alone. Every future financial obligation that might have once been shared was now squarely in my control, with legal clauses that gave me absolute veto power. I was the gatekeeper of the money, the assets, the very livelihood Wendy relied on. Outwardly, I played the part of the dutiful daughter-in-law, the concerned family member, the silent supporter. At the last family gathering, I smiled through the forced small talk, while Wendy chatted nearby, oblivious to the legal barricades I was erecting. She didn't notice that the passwords she casually used before no longer worked, that her access to accounts was silently revoked. She assumed her control was intact, that her influence remained unchallenged. I let her believe that illusion. It was the calm before the storm, the silence preceding the strike. The nights were the hardest. Alone in the quiet of our bedroom, I reviewed updates with Daniel, voices lowered to whispers. The weight of what I was doing pressed on me, the betrayal, the strategy, but so did the strange relief of reclaiming power. I felt like a sleeping volcano, dormant yet deadly, waiting for the moment to erupt. I was careful not to tip my hand too soon. Precision was vital. If I moved too fast, too visibly, Wendy's cunning would turn it against me. But with every document signed, every password changed, every deed updated, I felt the walls of control tightening around her, not me. I glanced at the family photos on the wall, smiling faces frozen in time, and something cold settled in my gut. This wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my place in this family, and ending a cycle of silent abuse. I whispered under my breath, "Let them think the storm hasn't come yet, but when it does, it will be undeniable." One afternoon, as I sifted through old family files stored in a dusty box in the attic, a distant cousin appeared unexpectedly in the doorway. She held a thick folder, worn and heavy with age. "Destiny," she said quietly, eyes serious. "You need to see this." I gestured for her to come closer, my heart already pounding with uneasy curiosity. Inside the folder were faded documents, letters, and typed testimonies detailing a history I hadn't known existed. Karen Ellis, a woman married into the Stafford family years ago, had been Wendy's previous target. Evidence showed Karen had been financially drained, manipulated into signing over property rights she barely understood, left isolated and silenced. The parallels to my story were haunting. Same pattern of charm masking control, same quiet erosion of rights and dignity. I read through Karen's words, her pain echoing mine. It was as if Wendy's greed was a dark legacy, passed down and perfected. The shock hit me like a tidal wave. I wasn't alone. I wasn't the first to suffer under Wendy's parasitic grip. This was bigger than just my bruised pride or stolen money. It was a cycle of exploitation that had haunted this family for years. The realization hardened something inside me. This fight was not just for me, but for every woman Wendy had ever used and discarded. I folded the papers carefully, determination flooding my veins. This wasn't merely personal revenge. It was justice. Finally, I understood the full weight of what I was up against and what I must do. I looked up at my cousin, gratitude and fierce resolve burning in my eyes. "Thank you for trusting me with this," I said softly. "This changes everything." The quiet in the attic felt heavier now, filled with the ghosts of past betrayals and the promise of reckoning. I swallowed back the lump in my throat and whispered to myself, "This ends with me." With the clarity of purpose stealing my nerves, I began cutting the financial lifelines that Wendy and Harold depended on. Automatic payments for utilities, loans, and other household expenses that had once quietly flowed from my accounts were halted, one by one. The silence of the house felt heavier as overdue notices began arriving, piling up in the Stafford mailbox. I refused to respond, keeping my resolve ironclad. Wendy's frantic calls to access funds were blocked by the legal measures Daniel and I had put in place. Each rejection was a small victory, a chisel strike against the fortress of her control. Daniel and I sent certified letters warning Wendy and Harold that any unauthorized use of our assets would be met with legal action. The letters were cold and formal, lacking the emotion that twisted inside me but carrying unmistakable weight. The news of financial troubles rippled quietly through the family grapevine, whispered rumors murmuring about sudden difficulties, yet no one connected the dots to me. At least, not yet. I kept my composure at every gathering, the icy calm of a woman who had just made her first move in a long game. At home, Daniel's steady presence was my anchor. One night, after a long day of strategizing and silence, he took my hand. "We're setting the board," he said softly. "They don't see it yet, but they will." His words ignited a flicker of hope and fire in my chest. We were no longer pawns in Wendy's game. We were the players, and every calculated step we took was a message. The era of silent sacrifice was over. The battle lines were drawn, and the first moves had been made. The Stafford family reunion felt different this time, charged with an unspoken tension that made every smile brittle. I stood near the worn wooden table, clutching the folder that held my ammunition. Loan documents, bank statements, property titles. Daniel was beside me, calm but alert, and the lawyer's presence was a silent reminder that this was no ordinary conversation. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice as I addressed the room that had so often been a stage for manipulation. "These loans," I said, sliding the papers across the table, "were taken out without my consent. The properties listed here, our family home, the rental units, they are mine, legally and irrevocably." My eyes met Wendy's, and I saw the color drain from her face, a flicker of shock, and something darker, fear. She hadn't expected this calculated unveiling, not in front of everyone. The room quieted to a near hush, relatives exchanging glances filled with disbelief and discomfort. The air was thick, charged with the weight of truths laid bare. I continued, voice firm and unyielding. This ends now. No more silent sacrifices. No more exploitation cloaked in family loyalty. These documents prove my ownership and my refusal to tolerate theft and control. The power dynamic shifted palpably. No longer the silent victim, I was now the one holding the cards. I felt a surge of something fierce and quiet inside me. Control, dignity, justice. The room's atmosphere shifted, doubt fading in many eyes, replaced by a newfound respect. Wendy's lips pressed into a thin line. Her usual poise cracked. This was my moment, the champagne moment, the turning point, and I embraced it with every fiber of my being. After a long pause, Daniel reached for my hand under the table, grounding me. The relatives who had once whispered behind their hands now looked to me with something like approval, or at least acknowledgement. I had laid down a boundary so firm it echoed through the room like a verdict. The mask of family harmony was shattered, and in that silence, I felt the first breath of freedom. The aftermath was immediate and undeniable. Wendy's world began to crumble one desperate phone call at a time. Banks froze accounts linked to those unauthorized loans, and I watched from a careful distance as panic edged into her voice when she called, begging for explanations I refused to give. My boundaries were clear. No negotiation, no excuses. The credit score drops and mounting debts whispered ruin. Family members who once stood firmly by Wendy's side started to question the story she'd spun for years. Loyalty wavered like a candle flickering in a storm. Texts flooded my phone. Pleas, false apologies, frantic attempts to undo the damage. But I remained silent, my resolve unshaken. The Stafford family facade cracked visibly, exposing the raw cost of greed disguised as familial duty. Daniel and I fortified our position, closing every loophole we could find and preparing for the legal battles we knew were coming. Each new threat or call was met with calm refusal. Satisfaction tinged my resolve, but I kept my focus on justice, not revenge. The cracks in Wendy's armor widened daily. She scrambled, her control slipping through desperate fingers as creditors pressed harder, and the household once ruled by her quiet tyranny faltered. I felt no joy in her downfall, only the cold satisfaction of reclaimed dignity. This was right. This was the balance restoring itself. Wendy's next moves were frantic and reckless. She threatened legal action for defamation, her voice trembling but still laced with venom. She cast herself as a victim, attempting to manipulate family members with sob stories and cries of betrayal. I saw her rally the few loyalists left, trying to pressure me with veiled threats and emotional blackmail. She even hinted at turning our community against me through social smear campaigns, a chilling effort to isolate me completely. But I was ready. Our lawyer had anticipated every tactic, and Daniel stood unyielding beside me, a fortress of support. When some relatives approached me with hesitant apologies, their eyes filled with shame, I accepted their words without lowering my guard. Boundaries remained firm. Trust had to be earned anew. The isolation around Wendy grew palpable. Her threads of control frayed and snapped, leaving her more alone than ever. Each attempt she made to regain power was met with unwavering resistance. I no longer feared her manipulations because I had fortified myself with truth and support. The Stafford family's tangled web was unraveling, and Wendy was caught in the center, exposed and defeated. Her final cards were played and lost with a quiet inevitability. 6 months have passed since the storm broke. The family gatherings are smaller, quieter, but somehow healthier. Daniel and I cherish the autonomy we've fought so hard to reclaim, breathing easier now that the weight of exploitation has lifted. Wendy's influence is diminished but not erased, a constant reminder that actions carry consequences, real and lasting. I live with clearer boundaries now, no longer the silent provider, but a vigilant protector of my rights and well-being. The house feels like a sanctuary rather than a battleground, filled with light and the steady hum of normalcy. I've learned that peace isn't about everyone's approval. It's about respect, self-worth, and the freedom to define my own life. Looking back, I see the journey wasn't just about fighting against betrayal. It was about discovering my own strength. The future remains uncertain, yes, but it's mine to shape, unburdened by the shadows of the past. In the quiet moments, I whisper a promise to myself. This time, I am the one who holds the pen.